Hi everyone, welcome to my review of Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket in 1987. So yes, back again with Stanley Kubrick. For me, the greatest director of all time. And once again, for going through this set, we only have one film after this left in terms of these, chronological main feature films. His main body of work, and that is Eyes Wide Shut. A massive gap of 12 years, in between the releases of these two films. That's his final film. We'll get to that. That's even more controversial than this. But yeah, this is controversial, this film a little bit. And, it is, it's going to be a spoilers review, of course. And yeah, going through this set again, the one up there, and of course behind me as well, we have the very first Kubrick set that I got. Many memories of this, first discovering Barry Lyndon, wow, and stuff, and just really going into this body of work of Kubrick. My main true obsession for his films really began then, around this time, 2014. He is my favourite director of all time now, and has been since I went through this set, really. This is, for me, the finest director who ever lived, and yes, my number one, kind of idol, if you will. Yes, back again with this review. Full Metal Jacket is... and of course, spoilers in this. I'll be getting into some deaths, in the film, and just going into the themes, which could, if you've not seen the film, go ahead and watch it, or be warned. I will be getting into some spoilers here, and yes, this film, it's a film that I'd seen before going into this set. It was one of the first three Kubricks that I saw. I saw Spartacus and The Shining, of course, before this, and I was around about 12 or 13, something like that, when I saw Full Metal Jacket for the first time. I was very interested from then on, in war films, especially, but Vietnam war films, which of course this is. It is, it's a black comedy as well, as a lot of Kubrick films are. They're very satirical. This is no exception, in my opinion, even though it is such a powerful war film. But yes, this is a film. When I saw it, I was that age, and yes, it's controversial. Some people do not like this film, or call it a lesser Kubrick film. Most people praise the first 45 minutes. I assume, the boot camp kind of training sequence in the Marines, of course. And yes, you've got Ermey, the drill instructor there, the sergeant leading, the men, and actually, training them up in the boot camp. And after that, after a big event, of course, his death. Wow, that is certainly a moment. We have the rest of the film, which a lot of people don't think compares, to the first act, if you will. It's kind of many call it a split, two distinct halves, and I consider it really more close to being just three distinct kind of things. But yes, of course, if you have to make the first split, in terms of just how the film, maybe in some regards changes, it is, the 45-minute mark, and then, it almost kind of goes back to more kind of jolly, upbeat kind of, more comedy again, after that 45-minute mark, after that tragic event, and then, again, it goes right up into the more powerful and tragic, and just, visceral kind of moments towards the end of this next part of the film, and, the ending of the film. Very complex, very interesting here. And what do I think of the film? And I've maybe hinted at times, but there are people, of course, that do not like it, but a lot of people love the film, and it is one of the most commercial Kubrick films, no doubt. It's one of the most famous films, and it's in the top 100 still, I think on IMDb with an 8.3, and I happen to be, certainly a believer personally. This is one of the finest films, yet again, ever made. This is, wow. The love I have for this film is really something else. This is in my top 100, personally. I know a lot of people don't maybe feel a lot of affection for this one compared to a lot of the Kubrick films, but I really count this as one of the very best, or in terms of quality, maybe not by the numbers, because, if he made 11 and this isn't quite into a certain number, then, but it's certainly one of his very most affecting films, and it's one of the very best films ever made, in my opinion. No doubt, this is yet another masterpiece, a mind-blowing film. It really is, and I first saw it, of course, when I was about 12, 13, of course, and wow, this really just blew me away. And I'd seen it quite a few times after that, even before I got the sets, both the box sets here, and I've seen it over 10 times now. This really is a stunning film, and I love this. I love this film so much. It's just so entertaining, so enthralling, hilarious. No doubt, this is a black comedy at times, very satirical, but it's such a powerful film, and every single time it just gets better and better. This is into my top 100, no doubt, and it's just one of the best war films. I really think it certainly is, and it's just there's so much in this. To take from. It's just a lot of people say this is just not as artistic and as kind of precise and as kind of sophisticated, many things, as a lot of his work. I don't think, it's his top three or anything, but wow, it doesn't have to be. I think this is just, Stanley Kubrick is the greatest director of all time for me, and, it doesn't need to be in a top three to be one of the best films ever made. This is certainly for me his finest war film, actually. I think it really, really is. You've got Dr. Strangelove, you've got, in some regards, Spartacus, of course, as well, but you've also got the big one being Paths of Glory. I think this is leagues above both of them films, actually, personally for me, and it's so powerful, and from start to finish, it's his most funny film. I think the funniest Kubrick film. But also, yeah, it's just something very, very unique about this, and wow, the themes that are in this, something I truly appreciate and connect to, absolutely. Now, the first act is the boot camp sequence. You have Ermey, just after this hilarious opening where all the men are getting their heads shaved. You've got the song "Hello Vietnam," playing in the background, and yes, you've got this kind of montage of a lot of the main characters here, and they're getting shaven for the Marines, and this is the boot camp sequence, and yes, basically, of course, we have Ermey as the instructor, basically, really going to town on these, these privates, of course, these men, and how basically trying the overall kind of the way the film shows how these men are trying to be made to be, they're trying to be made to be ultimate killers, machines, if you will, for going actually into the field eventually, and this is what the film is. Although it's very, very much a comedy, of course, and while it is a comedy, it really, really every time it just creeps in this kind of dark, kind of feeling, and this tragedy and real sadness. Actually, of course, you have Joker as he's named. And that's another thing. One of the many themes is kind of how they, of course, relating to how these men are kind of made into machines. At least they're, aim to be, made into these killers. Is to give the men, different names, nicknames, so they kind of move away from their past, life, if you will, and their identity. And yes, they're given nicknames. Joker, to of course Matthew Modine's character. This is for me one of the best protagonists in film, and once again, of course, most Stanley Kubrick films I can say this about. There's so many of his films are just some of the greatest characters, some of the greatest protagonists in film, and you've got Joker, who's basically the main character. You've got Private Pyle, who is played by Vincent D'onofrio, and you've also got Cowboy, and you've got many other characters here, and the second half, different characters come into play, but of course Cowboy, as we know, makes a return, which is just such a great moment, and then of course for the big portion of the film later on, he is with Joker again. He is reunited. I love this kind of the way that the film, is such a journey here. It's an epic film, and you've got this boot camp sequence, which is just, it's so epic. It's hilarious, of course. It's shocking. It really is, as well. And Ermey was actually an instructor, so a lot of the lines actually, as most people know, are ad-libbed. And yes, you have just so many lines that are so quotable, and it's just really, really genius. Even though a lot of it's ad-libbed, of course, it's just something else. The actual the lines of dialogue here, you know, the one-liners, of course. And it's just one of the most unforgettable, you know, sequences, segments, you know, of a film ever. It really, really is. But then you have, you know, this real kind of shift, you know, within this sequence, which really, really is one of the most powerful moments in film, of course. Vincent D'onofrio's character, at first, Private Pyle, is not successful. You know, he stands out and he keeps messing things up, you know, for the other members, you know, of the Marines, and basically the drill instructor, of course, Hartman, basically starts punishing, as we know, the other characters because of Pyle's mistakes, and you know, they get angry with him, they kind of beat him and everything, and it's this horrible process that he goes through. But then he starts to, of course, become insane, and he's not, you know, he's a character who's certainly already unhinged. He's not, you know, the kind of the most stable of characters, and of course, this whole process, you know, in the way, of course, these men are made to be, you know, killers, machines. This is one of the negative effects that happens, of course. One of the outcomes, and of course, he does kill our instructor of the film, and you know, that is just one of the greatest moments for me in film. You know, it's really, really tragic, so complex. You know, of course, you know, there's no doubt that this would have happened. This is one of the effects that this can have, and but at the same time, it's very tragic. Of course, you know, with the death, you know, of this instructor, I feel it's very you know, complex, and very kind of, yes, it's so affecting in many, many different ways, and that is just one of the greatest moments in film. You have, of course, the score in this film. The actual score is composed by Abigail Mead, aka the daughter of Stanley Kubrick, one of the daughters, Vivian Kubrick. So yeah, you know, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful, truly moving score, and it's really, really present, you know, in the end of this act, and also the ending of the film. And wow, it really brings tears to my eyes. It certainly does. Certainly in the ending, the very ending of the film. Wow, just absolutely stunning. So hats off to the composing there. You know, absolutely wonderful. Of course, and the existing music, of course. Once again, Kubrick, who never wanted, you know, all the music that is used really in his films, it has to be something that he personally, you know, basically loved. You know, the songs and stuff in his films, you know. So and this the soundtrack to the film, the songs that are used are so amazing. I love the soundtrack. Listen to it quite a lot, and you know, of course, you've got Surfing Bird, you know, an insane but just brilliant song. You've got so many different songs. Ending, of course, in the credits with Paint It Black, one of the best songs of all time for me. Just an epic, you know, kind of just wonderful soundtrack across the board. All these songs in the film are just used to perfection, and the editing to this film is absolutely stunning. This is something to behold. The fades, these wonderful shots, you know, it really is something else. And at times, you know, really playing into the duality of man, and you know, it's something that, of course, another one of the themes, the big themes in this film, is the duality of man. This is something that is, you know, is the most explored theme, if you will, and it ties into everything in the film. And you know, this is basically showing that everyone, you know, can have good, you know, and potentially and evil in them, and you know, that coexists many times, you know, throughout history, of course. And you know, the war itself, the Vietnam War, is really delved into in this film, and the effects, of course, in general, the war has, you know, on individuals, and but the duality of man, you know, this is so present in the film, and you know, it's something that is present in the first act, but even more so put to kind of you know, explored in the second part of the film. Wow, you know, this is something else, you know, and it's just so moving, and so human. You know, it really does just show how complex and balanced, you know, this film is, you know, and how human and how kind of well thought out this is. You know, I think the way that Kubrick kind of he you know, you've got many likable characters in the film. There's times where they do despicable things, you know, in the film, and things you don't agree with, of course. It's not, you know, kind of it's very much a film, of course, that shows this, you know, in just a balanced and sincere way, and that's something that Kubrick does in all of his films. Really, it's just yeah, he just shows humanity in such a kind of a sincere way, showing the flaws, as well as the good traits of individuals, of humans, and this film really goes full on to, into this, certainly delving in very you know very very intensely in this film. This is an intense view, but again, it's at the same time one of the funniest films for me, and I love many times as well how Kubrick kind of satirizes many things, but also turns a film into just such a moving experience. Often very immediately after you've got of comedy, you've got many tragic events, in his films, and this is no exception. It really is something that, in the end is such a tragedy, such a moving experience, really makes me cry. But again, it's one of the most kind of lively and just hilarious films as well. And yes, after this kind of boot camp sequence, we go full on into the kind of the Vietnam War, out in the field, these guys, and you've got quite a few events, that real life events that are portrayed in the film. The Tet ceasefire, Tet offensive, which is a big turning point in the Vietnam War, and of course, as we know, it's a very unexpected and significant event in this war, and yes, it just I love how it kind of explores many different themes that relate to specifically to the Vietnam War, but also just in general to regarding humanity, and I love the way that the duality of man is explored. Of course, the peace symbol, and the born to kill. This is one of the things that really stand out in the film. It's just genius. It really is, in the way it comes across on screen. This is just a masterpiece. It really is. Of course, the way that everyone's a contradiction in many regards, and the how baffling and just insane war can be. How it's kind of like Apocalypse Now, this film, in many regards, the way it kind of shows the madness, and the insanity of war, and how it can make actual individuals turn out kind of completely insane, or just dehumanize men, and it also specifically explores masculinity. There is definitely something going on in this film in every sense, where it's really showing the kind of the face that many people put on as well. The kind of for show. How many men and everything can kind of pretend many things, and kind of try to appear masculine, and the kind of how laughable it is at times as well. And Joker is one of the characters really that kind of is one of the only characters who really realizes how kind of basically he sees the kind of truth in this, and the kind of the humor in it, and I love the John Wayne references. It's got a lot of references in the film, and John Wayne, the John Wayne references are hilarious, of course, and that's another thing. A lot of the characters try to imitate him because he's kind of a kind of a figure that represented masculinity in many regards, but certainly the way they reference John Wayne in the film is so effective. The dialogue in this film is genius. Once again, co-written by Kubrick. This is an absolute masterpiece of a script. Wow, truly something else. Every single line has a meaning, and in itself so investing. I think straight from the opening scene, of course, thrown into this intimidating, to say the least, draw instructor, of Ermey, and from the get-go, we are put into this experience, so visceral, and just at the same time, truly spiritual experience, one that really elevates right into the heights of cinema for me. And yes, you're thrown into the situation, and it's something that never lets up, and it's a comedy, but it's so affecting as well, in my opinion. And I just think the way that masculinity is explored is really something else. This is once again in the most sincere of ways that Kubrick does this, and it's really it's just such an enjoyable film with the characters as well. While they're so flawed at times, as humans, they are so well written. The acting is absolutely stunning. Wow, Vincent D'onofrio gives an absolutely masterful performance. The way his character, he's so sympathetic, and it really is moving. Of course, when he does, eventually, shoot the sergeant, the drill instructor, and kills himself. What a moment! The performance is absolutely outstanding. When he slowly descends into madness, and really, really is something else. The way he becomes, certainly becomes a product, of the environment, and the way that the aim was to get them to kind of become killer machines, and certainly they done this with him, and the negatives come out, certainly in this character, and this is what can happen. The dehumanization of war, even the training aspect of this, made this character, completely break out, and of course, yes, very, very tragic, and so moving. The more you think about this, but the performance by Vincent is absolutely stunning. Matthew Modine is absolutely brilliant in this film. What a performance! Ermey, of course, no question, absolutely stunning. Adam Baldwin, an underrated character that he plays of Animal Mother. This is, I just think he's one of the best characters in film as well. He's such a standout character. What a great character. Someone who does not, conform as much as a lot of the other characters. And I love the kind of the bravery of this character and stuff, and how he kind of just he goes in. When he charges in, in the second half of the film. What a moment, what a kind of epic moment, and he adds a lot of the comedy to the film as well, and it's striking how you can get so invested in these boot camp characters. Of course, you have Cowboy returning, one of the best characters as well in a film in the second half, but and he's one of the only returning characters from that sequence, along with, of course, Joker, Private Joker. But yes, you have very, very, a lot of characters in the first half who I always get invested in, and then you've got more characters coming into play in the second half of the film, and both halves of the film are full of absolutely flawless characters in the writing, in the performances, and let's just mention that ending. Wow, has there ever really been too much more, affecting endings than this? It really is. Wow. What an ending, of course. That sniper, of course, turns out to be a very young female, of course, who is, once again, just like these other characters, used, trained, of course, at a young age, to be a killer machine. And, it's so horrible, of course, when she does get shot. And, it's something that really sums up the film. If an ending can sum up a film, this is certainly one of the perfect examples of that, and all the characters having different reactions. And yes, just overall showing how balanced, this film is, and how kind of Kubrick approaches, from different angles, just showing everything, about this. And, I cannot praise this film more. And, wow, we must say, the underrated, in my opinion, cinematography, once again, just like all the Kubrick films, really, the cinematography is absolutely stunning. I count this as one of his, best shot films. Really some of the best cinematography that I've ever seen. The scenes, of course, when our individuals, of course, in the boot camp sequences. The two shots. There's two shots in the film where they're running in the mud. And they're running through, charging, and the use of slow motion is perfect. And just them shots there, especially. You've got the scenes, with the sunsets, which are absolutely stunning, and just the overall, wow, the framing in the film, the alignment of every single shot in the film, absolutely stunning. The second half is more, wow, very much a bit more documentary-esque, actually, in the way it's shot. Just the overall way that the Kubrick gets really, low down, and of course, in the gritty, sort of nature, when the men are running through in the second half, it's very, a bit different to the more precise, consistently precise first 45 minutes. It's a bit different, but for me, for all the times that people say, and fair enough, it's everyone's allowed their own opinion, but for many people saying it's two completely different films, or it's many different films, I don't think, despite the kind of the differences, there is differences, in the film and the acts of the film. I really think this is just such a complete, experience. I think this is certainly a complete picture. It may be different at times in tone, but and style maybe a little bit, and what it's trying to do. But I think it really is such a complete film, and it is, in my opinion, flawless. But yeah, it's just the way across the whole course of the film, the way the film is shot, is absolutely masterful, no doubt. And wow, just every single shot, the close-ups. Once again, we've got the traditional, the Kubrick stares and all these kind of traits, of course, that would be in so many of his films. But this, it's just such a. I find it to be such an enthralling film, such a visceral film, yet highly spiritual for me. It's just stunning, and I love, as I say, I love the use of satire in the film, and the way, the way he is, really poking fun at the government in general, and the media, and the way the war was kind of being used with journalists, reporters, and in the media, with how to kind of to twist things, and lie, to many members of the public, and of course very evident in the scenes with Joker, and all the stories, of course, that they're writing up, and the leader there is basically saying, telling them what the message is meant to be, to inspire the hearts and minds, and basically, yes, to make them feel positive about such a a tragedy in our history. And it's just the way that Kubrick does this. It's very it's very sad, of course, what it was saying and stuff, but again, at the same time, really just such an effective satire. The way, of course, it shows. I love the scene. It's hilarious, of course, when all the men, in the second half, getting interviewed, and it's just hilarious stuff. What they're saying about the war and stuff. And it's, a lot of people maybe just, as I say, the second half is not as popular, but I personally think it's better. I think it's even better than the first. Well, not exactly half, but the 45-minute mark, as I say, is the shift, and it kind of is the most kind of true of being a split in the film. And I really do think the second part of the film is even finer. The last 20 minutes being the absolute high point for me of the film, and it's absolutely stunning the way he brings us together, and the ending, the last shot of our men, going through, at night, of course, with the flames and everything, and they're tracking shots here, and the narration by Matthew Modine, just one of the best, most mythic final shots in a film. And wow, I think this film is just staggering. It really is, and the whole kind of the way he brings us together. And of course, you've got the lines. There's such powerful lines, just so effective and stuff. And then, yes, as I say, that leading to the credits there, painted black. Wow, there's some film this really is. I really think this is. Of course, everyone has different opinions, but I think it's an underrated Kubrick film. It's not quite as respected. I think a little bit unfairly at times. There's a lot of his work. I do think that this is such a masterpiece of cinema. I do think it's one of the finest films ever made, and these themes they're explored in the film, the duality of man, masculinity. It really is showing all the kind of flaws and everything of many men, of course, but just I find as I say, it's a comedy, and while being a definite tragedy and such a powerful moving film, but I do find there is such a heart to the film, such a warmth, and almost family feel, of the two different ensembles, you could say, in the film. The first, the boot camp sequence, it's very, very warm, despite, being very intense, and, shouting at them all the time, and kind of at times beating them, and other characters beating, of course, Pyle, and you've got this whole isolation going on with him, and dehumanizing the effects it has on him, and how horrible it is, how tragic. But again, at the same time, it's really, really, truly warm, I find, full of heart, and kind of just a peaceful, film at times. And it's such a unique film. It really, really is. For a war film, it's very, uniquely and just upbeat at times, and just hilarious. It doesn't, it really does when it needs to go full on. It really, really is, and it says something truly powerful about war and the effects it has on humans. What a film. And of course, as I say, evident in the final scene in particular, how it shows both sides of this. Kubrick was an all-round such a a filmmaker who always showed the complexities and each side of humans, of humanity, and Paths of Glory, Lolita even, showing this, and just all his films, really, really something else. His body of work is something else. He is my favourite director after all. Personally, he is my pick for the best, and we have Eyes Wide Shut coming up next, and that is maybe one of the most controversial films of all time. Find out what I have to think about that. We'll be wrapping up with this review soon, but yes, I'm not going to reveal my thoughts. I have maybe revealed it, sometimes to people on my channel. You can kind of put it together. But all I'll say is that film was, unexpected in every single way. But yes, Full Metal Jacket. I think this is one of the finest films ever made. I think the acting, the use of music, everything in the filmmaking department, the overall, how it kind of just, it's a hilarious film, but it's so tragic and so powerful, and kind of the deaths in the film, every death, is felt. It really, really is. The emphasis that is placed on these characters, these individuals, while it shows the complexities and, the flaws, the despicable nature of many characters in the film. The overall, the tone is very, it shows many, many different things, about the horrors of war. But of course, I got so invested in every single character. The narrative is just perfect. You could say that the two acts are the same in many regards. It's this kind of, it's almost saying the same thing. Just in different areas of war. And kind of how these men transform, of course, throughout the war. This is a journey, of course. They transform in both acts, and of course it also shows that I always find it just shows how this boot camp training that is kind of within wars and kind of in the army and the Marines, of course, how it doesn't kind of fully prepare an individual for the actual horrors of war, and how of course right at the end of the film where Joker is actually face to face, right up close and personal with, the opposite end, an individual from the other side of this war. That's when it really, once again, I say everything comes together here. It really, it shows how, wow, okay, he didn't expect maybe to feel this, and it's something that it's so human, this film, and it just shows both sides of this, although maybe a viewer would not expect that at first. I think it has been criticised at times, but I think it's just an absolute masterpiece, a very, very high film, within my 100% plus tier 1 mark. This is an absolute masterpiece, very, very close, don't get me wrong, to the tier S. It's very, very close. I think this is one of the absolute greatest masterpieces of all time. I think it's the best war film that Kubrick ever made. Just stunning, and at times his least popular war film, which is, it's always interesting to see the rankings. Everyone will have a different ranking, really, for different reasons, which is the most important thing. your affection, for the Kubrick films and cinema in general. It's always interesting to see why people have an affection for a particular film over this, and how they compare, and how Kubrick was a filmmaker who done so many different genres, and how kind of he kept his overall, there was many traits that appeared throughout his films, and I always find there's an absolute intensity to his films, certainly from 2001 onwards, right up to the end of his filmography with Eyes Wide Shut, but I think there's always something, and in this, despite being so many different genres, of course, as I say, that he dabbled into, and this film is just a stunning piece of work. It's epic. It's it's tragic. It's hilarious. It's full of charm, and just of course banter between the characters. It's so enjoyable. So much relatable characters. Yet also showing the flaws of these characters. These are not one-sided at all. Absolutely not. Not even our sergeant. The drill instructor. Played by Ermey. I think he's there is there's kind of an odd charm about his character, even though he really is going to town on these individuals, and of course he's beating them at times. He's really punishing, of course, but he kind of really there is something about the character who how he is actually there is a slight warmth there, and a kind of humanity to him. And I just find the friendship, the sense of friendship, and community feeling this film has, is really something else. That's one of the things I relate to, the warmth of the film, what I'm saying here, and the heart of the film, the humanity. Really, these relationships, particularly, of course, with Cowboy and Joker, how they wonderfully meet up again. Something. When I first saw the film, I was thinking, oh, is it just gonna? It's obviously just gonna be, Joker, this character who we follow throughout the entire film. But then when you hear, the mention, of course, of Cowboy, it's something for the first time you're kind of just like, oh, brilliant, so pleasing, because their friendship and their kind of camaraderie, and just overall, the enjoyability of them together in the first half, the boot camp sequence, and the chemistry between Arliss Harewood and Matthew Modine is really so strong, so perfect, and just something where across the entire journey, this epic film, I really love this friendship, this brotherly feeling, of course, and just so sad. Maybe the saddest death, in the film is Cowboy, of course. As we know, he does get shot, and that is, that's it. When the rest of the characters just think, we have to go straight in here, and kind of, of course, it leads to something that is very unexpected, for these characters. But that's of course the nature of war. It really it shows everything. In this, the different sides. But this friendship is one of the things that really makes the film so a film that I have such an affection for, and this shown across this whole film. When the death does occur, it's so tragic, it's so moving, and it's so felt. The deaths in the film, the emphasis that's placed on these lives. It's so wonderful, and as I say, all the characters, particularly Cowboy and Joker, it's just portrayed in such a wonderful way, and this friendship is one of the things that really drives the film, and it's just all these different things you pick up on just throughout the film makes it such a complex and such a fascinating film, and just one of the most enjoyable films for me. One of my favourite films, one of the films that I have the most affection for, and I've seen it many times now, over 10 times, and it's definitely one of Kubrick's many masterpieces, of course. What I think of Eyes Wide Shut, I will not reveal now, but I think Stanley Kubrick was the greatest, and this is once again an absolute flawless masterpiece in my opinion. Of course, it's not for everyone, and it's very full on at times. Some people don't maybe like war films and stuff, which is fine, and it's not for everyone, this film. It's very different as well. If you appreciate more some of Kubrick's particular films, over others. It's all fine. It's all great to discuss and compare, and yes, just generally, share our passions for his films, for his filmography, of course. And Full Metal Jacket, it's fine if people don't think it's one of his best, but I do think it's better than quite a lot of the other films in his career, and I think he's just in such control here, such precision. But again, it doesn't feel one-sided at all. It doesn't feel manufactured. It really is a film he really puts his heart into, his passion, and it's something that's so balanced. So complex and well-rounded. It's just a stunning piece of work. It really is. The action, of course, all of this, and even the satire and the slow motion towards the end, you always pick up on, hilarious, but again, so tragic. This film is a marvel to behold, in my opinion. I do personally, just in my opinion, I do think it is a masterpiece. It is a perfect film, one of the very, very, very best films. Well into my top 100, and it's always been one of my most loved films. While it's grown on me each time, I loved it instantly, and I didn't see the kind of personally, I didn't agree, with the fact that the second half is lesser at all. I think actually, in my opinion, it's finer. It puts these characters that we've kind of some of them grown to love, into, especially Joker, of course, into the actual field, and the way it contrasts. But it's just it's so much as one, this film, and it just really comes together so perfectly in the end. And yes, just the way I love the comedy in the first half, but the way that actually the comedy in the second half is it's these characters together, joking and stuff. And I think because the first half is more against the comedy against characters, or of course Ermey, mocking these characters and stuff, and yeah, the one-liners. But then you've got the kind of for me even more enjoyable comedy, and with the characters actually playing off one another, and the different members of the cast in the second half. But I think both halves are perfect, and they're both as one, a bit distinct at times. They're very a bit different. Especially the fact that the first half is more one location, mainly more contained. But then again, you think actually the 1 hour 10 minute mark onwards, actually roughly the same location as well. With the rest of the kind of film. It's very, very interesting, of course, and it's an epic film. Can't say much more. A beautiful, beautiful film, highly spiritual to me, and it's visceral. It's raw. It's so powerful. It's genius in its execution, in the exploration of its themes. The duality of man. Rarely as a film, delved into this, in a greater way. Masculinity, the way that is explored in such a sincere and meaningful way, and just the way overall it just shows truth. Really delves into this and the nature of this, and how media, of course, influenced the Vietnam War. And just the government, and certain figures, and just the nature of the Vietnam War specifically, but in general war, and the effects that it can have on individuals. And wow, some film, it really, really is. And yes, next up is Eyes Wide Shut. Let's just say an unexpected film. I first saw that 2016. I've seen it a few times since, and have a lot to say about that one. Of course, his final film. But yes, we will be talking about that film in the next Kubrick review, and should be within 2 weeks, no doubt. And as always, thanks for watching my review.